Welcome to the DVD Shelf Movie Reviews, where movies are celebrated, not incinerated.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to enter the world of classic competitive arcade gaming. Tonight, witness a legendary showdown between an infamous reigning arcade champion and the newcomer who's looking to strip him of his crown and become the new king of the classic video game, Donkey Kong.
In this episode of the DVD Shelf Movie Reviews, I'll be looking at the 2007 documentary, The King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters, which gives us a glimpse at an obsessive passion for classic arcade gaming and chronicles the dog-eat-dog rivalry between players of Golden Age video games. Specifically, the film focuses on gaming champ Billy Mitchell and his shady ways of retaining his title of Donkey Kong champion from Steve Wiebe, a relative beginner in the world of classic competitive gaming. Before we dive into this quirky and funny real-life character piece and the subculture it portrays, we'll explore the origin of the classic Donkey Kong game itself and the impact it had during the heyday of the video arcade. Then I'll discuss the film's DVD and its generous offering of special features that bring you even further into this story. Finally, like always, I'll give The King of Kong and its DVD my final recommendation based on this rating scale, which ranges from 1 disc being just downloaded all the way to 5 discs being a must-own movie. So now without further ado, let's hit the start button on The King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters. Directed by Seth Gordon and starring Steve Wiebe, Billy Mitchell, Walter Day, Brian Koo, Robert Merchek, and Steve Sanders. It had a limited theatrical release from Picture House Entertainment that began on August 17, 2007, and the DVD was released on January 29, 2008. It all began in 1979 at the Nintendo Company headquarters in Kyoto, Japan. By this time, Nintendo had been slowly transitioning from a toy and playing card manufacturing company to a developer and distributor of electronic video games. In 1979, Nintendo released the game Radar Scope, which was predicted to be a surefire success seeing as it was heavily inspired by 2 already very popular video games, Space Invaders and Galaxies. When Radar Scope was released in Japanese arcades, it was a big hit. So much so that Nintendo's United States subsidiary company, the Washington State-based Nintendo of America, ordered a huge shipment of Radar Scope units to be distributed in the US. However, once the game hit American soil, it wasn't received so well, which resulted in Nintendo suffering a significant financial blow. In order to keep the company afloat, Nintendo selected staff artist Shigeru Miyamoto to create a brand new video game. At first, Miyamoto wanted to create a game based on cartoon sailor Popeye, a character he had loved since he was a kid. Nintendo was unable to obtain the rights for Popeye, so Miyamoto began creating original characters that possessed traits and relationships similar to the characters from Popeye. Popeye, of course, being the hero, his girlfriend Olive Oyl being the damsel in distress, and the jealous, villainous Bluto, who has been known for kidnapping Olive Oyl once in a while. Miyamoto also drew influences from his love of old movies. Inspired by Beauty and the Beast and King Kong, Miyamoto decided to have his barbaric bad guy be the pet gorilla of our hero. The gorilla would snatch the hero's girlfriend and carry her over his shoulder, not unlike the beastly King Kong. Miyamoto and Nintendo agreed to give this new game an English title so that it would appeal to audiences worldwide, specifically pandering to the Americans who had previously brushed off Radar Scope. So the game was officially titled Donkey Kong. Donkey equating to the gorilla being stubborn or silly like a donkey, and Kong, of course relating to King Kong. Our hero is a carpenter who was simply known as Jumpman, although in Japan he would occasionally go by Osan, which is a Japanese word for middle-aged man. Jumpman goes from level to level, attempting to save his girlfriend who is constantly being kidnapped by the giant ape and brought to the top of construction sites with platforms made out of steel girders. As you dodge obstacles and make your way up the screen, the ape relentlessly throws keg barrels at you, and you must avoid them to survive. Once you make it to the top, Kong snatches the girl away from you and takes her to the next level. Following the development of Donkey Kong, representatives for Nintendo of America were skeptical of its appeal since the game looked like nothing they had ever seen before. Donkey Kong in no way resembled hit shooter games such as Galaxian or popular maze games like Pac-Man. Nevertheless, after some persuasion, the game was distributed to US arcades in 1981 and became a huge hit, not only in America, but also in Canada and Japan. Donkey Kong had a large cultural impact, which was likely due to the game's characters actually showing personality, which was something that was obviously hard to pull off during the early days of video games due to the limitations of graphics technology. The likenesses of the characters transcended video games and appeared in various forms of media. The game became so huge that Universal Pictures sued Nintendo, claiming that Donkey Kong infringed the copyright of the original 1933 King Kong film. As it turned out, Universal didn't technically own the rights to that particular piece of Kong history, and the lawsuit eventually failed in court. Needless to say, Donkey Kong's massive success led to a huge boost in business for Nintendo and has since become one of the most revered classic video games in history. Nintendo was now becoming one of the giants in video game manufacturing and was able to compete with already established arcade titans such as Namco and Atari. Already a hit at the video arcades, Nintendo licensed Donkey Kong out to various home gaming consoles. Throughout the 80s, Nintendo focused its attention more on the idea of playing video games in your own home, which led to the massively popular 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System and the portable Game Boy system. As the decade progressed and home video gaming gradually proved to be the more popular pastime, arcades across the country were going out of business and the once bright lights of arcade gaming quickly faded.
Now I'm playing with power!
Donkey Kong's popularity inevitably led to sequels including Donkey Kong Jr. and Donkey Kong 3. Even the Jumpman character got his own spin-off game in 1983, which was developed by Donkey Kong's original creator Shigeru Miyamoto, who had changed Jumpman's occupation from carpenter to plumber, and also gave the character an actual name. Miyamoto named him after Mario Segale, the landlord of the Nintendo of America offices based out of Washington State, and now the character of Mario was an Italian-American plumber who, along with his brother Luigi, explores the drainage pipes of New York City and rids them of strange creatures. This, of course, was the original Mario Brothers, which has, needless to say, left an indelible mark on the Nintendo brand and a legacy that's way too big to explore any further in this episode. The mid-90s saw Donkey Kong getting a 16-bit facelift with the release of Donkey Kong Country, a side-scrolling 3D adventure game. The ape was now the hero, and he even brought along his nephew, Diddy Kong. Donkey Kong Country was released for the Super Nintendo and eventually became the second highest grossing Super Nintendo game of all time, just behind Super Mario World. This rekindled popularity brought a renaissance to the Donkey Kong franchise, and the game spawned multiple sequels, including a more recent installment from the Nintendo Wii. Donkey Kong has remained right up there with Mario as one of Nintendo's most beloved and recognizable characters. So hopefully that gives you just a taste of how important Donkey Kong was to the world of arcade gaming during its golden age. Now let's travel back to 1981 to a small Iowa town and meet Walter Day, businessman, arcade owner, and the key figure in our story. After several failed career attempts, Walter Day decided to turn his love for playing video games into a business venture that he says validated his desire to spend all day, every day, hanging out in a video arcade. On November 10th, 1981, Day opened a video arcade in Ottumwa, Iowa, and called it Twin Galaxies. While running Twin Galaxies, Walter Day would notice the high levels of skill and competitiveness amongst a select few of his clientele. The high scores of several of the arcade machines were out of this world, and Day wondered if amongst any of these scores, could any of them possibly be record-breaking. After contacting a couple of the game developers, he found out that not even the manufacturers of the games were aware of any world records. So that's when Walter Day decided to start a database of video game scores.
Send your playing techniques or high scores to the International Scoreboard in Ottumwa. Join us again for Video Game News Update. I'm Walter Day at the Twin Galaxies International Scoreboard.
In early 1982, Walter Day publicly released the Twin Galaxies International Scoreboard, and through much self-promotion and a fair amount of public exposure, Day began receiving 50 to 60 calls a day from gamers who wanted to submit their high scores to Day's official video game scoreboard. Later in 1982, Walter Day was contacted by Life magazine, who wanted to include Twin Galaxies as a representation of the arcade game phenomenon in their 1982 Year in Review special edition. To make this article special, Day convinced Life magazine to conduct a photo shoot outside of the Twin Galaxies arcade in Ottumwa, Iowa, that featured the top gamers on Day's scoreboard. On November 7, 1982, nearly 1 year after the opening of Twin Galaxies, many of the arcade champions from Day's scoreboard traveled from all across North America and gathered in Ottumwa, Iowa for the Life magazine photo shoot. Two of the champions present at the event were 17-year-old Billy Mitchell from Hollywood, Florida, and 18-year-old Steve Sanders from Kansas City, Missouri. Mitchell was present for being the world record holder in the game Centipede, and Sanders was there for his record-breaking score in Donkey Kong. However, after Billy Mitchell competed with Steve Sanders in a game of Donkey Kong and completely destroyed him, it was soon realized that Sanders had lied about his high score in Donkey Kong. After Sanders was outed as a fraud, Mitchell claimed his status of possessing the true world record in Donkey Kong along with his other record in Centipede. Following the Steve Sanders controversy, there were no hard feelings between him and Billy Mitchell, and the two have remained friends in the years since. During their interviews in The King of Kong, both Sanders and Mitchell credit this time during the early 80s as being the driving force behind the accomplishments in their adult lives. Sanders was so ashamed of lying about having a record-breaking Donkey Kong score that it forced him to completely turn his life around, where he eventually decided to go to college and become a lawyer. On the other hand, Billy Mitchell to this day continues to have a heightened sense of self-importance, all because of his skills at retro video games. Mitchell has used this ego to his advantage, however, becoming a successful developer of an internationally distributed line of hot sauces that he named after a small chain of family-owned restaurants in his hometown of Hollywood, Florida. Additionally, the Steve Sanders scandal also taught Walter Day how important it was to validate the high scores gamers would submit by seeing how well they could play a game live in person. The group of Twin Galaxies champions experienced a brief taste of celebrity as the arcade business continued to thrive. In 1983, the first official Twin Galaxies video game championship was filmed for the ABC show That's Incredible, an early 80s Believe It or Not type show that featured people showing off their amazing talents and abilities. That same year, Walter Day and Twin Galaxies established a U.S. national video game team that toured the country, performed in competitions, and even conducted the 1983 Video Game Masters Tournament, the results of which were featured in the 1984 edition of the Guinness Book of World Records. By 1984, home video gaming was gaining momentum, causing arcades to drop like flies all across the country. The Twin Galaxies arcade officially became a casualty of this cultural shift on March 6, 1984. However, even though the Twin Galaxies arcade was closed, Walter Day continued on with the official Twin Galaxies International Scoreboard, documenting submitted world-breaking video game scores and conducting retro gaming competitions. And since the advent of the internet and the extra exposure from the King of Kong, Day's Twin Galaxies community and traditions have continued to prosper, even after Day's retirement from the industry in 2010.
There'll always be the argument that video games are meant to be played for fun. Believe me, some of it's a lot of fun. But competitive gaming, when you want to attach your name to a world record, when you want your name written into history, you have to pay the price.
Now, what The King of Kong does fairly well, in my opinion, is that it starts off by briefing you in the history of Walter Day and Twin Galaxies, which helps set the stage for the retro video game universe you'll be submersed in for the rest of the film. Now, before I watched The King of Kong, I was completely unaware of this subculture of retro video game competitions. Now, of course, I had known how the internet loves reappropriating the look of old 8-bit game graphics and turning it into an art form in and of itself, and I agree that it can be fun to go back and play one of these classic games every once in a while for nostalgia's sake, but this film introduces you to a whole new level of vintage video game obsession.
I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs. I play video games, which I think is far superior an addiction than any of those other ones.
However, this somewhat eccentric arcade world the film opens with doesn't really have the legs to sustain as a movie all on its own, which is why it's great when the film starts to become more of an underdog story that mainly focuses on two men, Billy Mitchell and Steve Wiebe, a relative newbie to competitive gaming, a respected middle school science teacher, and likable family man. Growing up, Weeby possessed a wide range of talent and showed huge potential in everything from athletics to art and music. His friends and family call him a prodigy of sorts, and is as focused and driven as any person could be. But despite his gifts, life has continued to throw him curveballs, and he's never been able to quite achieve #1 status in any of his endeavors. Not long after being fired from his job, Steve Weeby happened upon the Twin Galaxies website. Being a massive Donkey Kong fan, he noticed that Billy Mitchell had been holding on to the Donkey Kong record high score since 1982. Confident that he could beat Mitchell's score, Weeby began practicing, and he set his sights on seeing if he could become the new Donkey Kong record holder. In July of 2004, Weeby beat Mitchell's score and also became the first person on record to cross the 1 million points mark in Donkey Kong. But Weeby's victory is short-lived, and as the dust clears, his story is only beginning. What follows during the course of the film is a startling turn of events that leads to conspiracy, where many Billy Mitchell backers believe Weeby actually cheated. You quickly find yourself rooting for this guy as he has to rise up against the skeptics and has to work hard at constantly proving himself worthy of contending in this surprisingly cutthroat world of retro video game competition. So how does a true story like this end up being documented on film in such great detail? Well, surprisingly, by accident. Prior to The King of Kong, Seth Gordon, the film's director, had experience in camera operation, editing, and producing, and was now in the process of putting together a documentary about retro video game tournaments. Gordon and his crew actually began making this film by following several different competitors in these tournaments and originally planned on making a film that followed their separate paths. One of the film's producers, Ed Cunningham, had met Steve Weeby through a mutual friend, Mike Thompson, who ended up being featured in The King of Kong. By this time, Steve Weeby had received the world record for his high score in Donkey Kong, and the story of Weeby having to save face after being accused of cheating fascinated Cunningham. It didn't take long for the crew to realize that this story had to become the focus of the film. And once it's all said and done, The King of Kong does an amazing job at chronicling this battle between Steve Weeby and Billy Mitchell. It's so calculated in the editing and the storytelling that you almost forget that you're watching a documentary. These characters are so defined and clear-cut that it feels almost like a classic good versus evil fable with a contemporary setting. Billy Mitchell is like a cartoon character with his perfectly styled hair and constant donning of patriotic neckties. Mitchell's genuine intensity and how he presents himself is one of the highlights of the film, and the hilarity comes in when you sit back and realize the somewhat pointless reasons why he takes himself so seriously.
If I have all this good fortune, if everything's rolling my way, if all these balls have bounced in my favor, there's some poor bastard out there who's getting the screws put to him.
The perfect counterbalance to that kind of pompous personality is Steve Weeby, the likable guy the audience can relate to. He's basically an archetypical Joe Average who's led a life of hard knocks and just wants to honestly prove he can win at something, no matter how trivial that something is. But again, like I said, this is a documentary, and in this particular case, a little bit of manipulation is done in order to tell the story cinematically, and believe me, the film did not come without a bit of controversy. Several individuals and certain small facts were either fudged or omitted from the film altogether to streamline the story, but director Seth Gordon is completely aware and unapologetic of this. Needless to say, Billy Mitchell was upset with the film's portrayal of him, but Seth Gordon claims that Mitchell would have come off as an even more evil character had more of his footage been left in. Now frankly, none of this alleged manipulation bothered me while watching the film, since I was able to enjoy the story purely at face value. But whether or not it's a good idea to create a non-fiction film in such a way, I guess depends on your own definition of a successful documentary. I do like, though, that the director doesn't feel the need to narrate the story like some documentary filmmakers do. Sometimes the director just narrates the story as a device that is meant to sway your opinion on what's happening. The King of Kong simply uses the art of editing to tell its story. What's also interesting about the editing is that it allows you to interpret the film's tone in a couple different ways. Now, not being a big gamer myself, I can personally see this film making fun of the subject matter, specifically how deadly serious the characters are about their obsession with something as essentially insignificant as video game competitions.
No matter what I say, it draws controversy. It's sort of like the abortion issue.
Nobody is making a living at this stuff, but so much of their lives are spent doing it and thinking about it. And with a regular, everyday guy like Steve Weeby being thrust into the subculture, we're discovering this world through him. However, one could possibly see this film in a different light as being a serious exploration into a certain lifestyle and the intensely passionate people who live within it. The The King of Kong was a hit amongst the limited crowds who were able to see it during its original run in 2007. Critics loved it, and it made it on quite a few of their top movies of the year lists. Elements from the movie were parodied in episodes of the popular TV shows My Name is Earl and Bones, and even an episode of South Park satirized the film's world record competition storyline, only instead of incorporating video games, this plot involved taking the world's largest shit. Oh, South Park. The King of Kong became such a huge cult hit amongst non-gamers and gamers alike that the 2010 Nintendo Wii game, Donkey Kong Country Returns, included a subtle little visual nod to Billy Mitchell's famous American flag neckties. The King of Kong marked the directorial debut of Seth Gordon, who went on to pursue a career in directing for film and television. Gordon has directed episodes for TV series like Modern Family, Community, and The Office. In 2008, Gordon directed 4 Christmases starring Vince Vaughn and Reese Witherspoon, and in 2011, Gordon directed the hit comedy Horrible Bosses. And the fact that Gordon and Steve Wiebe have remained friends since The King of Kong is evident in Wiebe's cameo appearances in both films. So here we have the DVD for The King of Kong. First off, what's cool about the case's cover art is that it's reversible, where the backside features a great piece of artwork created by illustrator Scott Campbell. The DVD menus fully embrace the classic arcade look and navigate you through a great offering of special features that take you beyond the story of the film. The Saga Continues is a brief feature that updates you on Donkey Kong high scores that were achieved by both Billy Mitchell and Steve Wiebe following the making of the movie. Of course, the updates are only as new as the DVD's 2007 manufacturing date, so even these updated stats are completely passé by now. The DVD provides 2 separate feature-length audio commentaries that you can listen to along with the movie. The first commentary features the film's director and producers and is by far the preferred commentary to listen to in comparison to the second one, which doesn't feature anyone who was actually involved with the film's production. Generous amounts of bonus footage and extended interviews give you more detailed looks into certain plot points that may have only been briefly glossed over in the actual film. Here, you'll learn a little more about Billy Mitchell, which may or may not change your opinion about the guy, if only a little bit. A really brief history of Donkey Kong doesn't lie. This animated feature truly gives you a really brief look inside the creation of the original arcade sensation. The Arcade Glossary is a mini dictionary of sorts that catches non-gamers up on terminology that is thrown around during the course of the film. Rounding out the special features is the I Am 8-Bit Music and Art Gallery, which gives you a brief promotional taste of retro video game-inspired artwork and music that can be seen in art exhibitions sponsored by the Los Angeles-based I Am 8-Bit organization. When it comes to documentaries that have been released in the past several years, The King of Kong is certainly amongst the ones that are must-watches, even if you're not a big fan of video games. The story encompasses raw human emotion and colorful characters that could be applied to any culture or competitive event, and the fact that it all revolves around something as inconsequential as video games makes it all the more memorable. That being said, I'll crown The King of Kong with a 5 out of 5 discs recommendation. This is a must-own movie.
It's absolute brutality.
Well, that about wraps up yet another episode of the DVD Shelf Movie Reviews. You can check out more of my DVD and Blu-ray reviews at HappyDragonPictures.com. Make sure to like my fan page on Facebook and follow me on Twitter for all the latest video updates. So I'll see you next time, but for now, this one's going back on the DVD Shelf.
Well, maybe they'd like it if I lose. I gotta try losing sometime.